Welcome back to Good Law, Bad Law. On this issue, I sit down with two lawyers who've started an organization called A Call to the Bar, and they're calling on lawyers in particular as individuals who understand the law and the importance of the law to get involved in the issue of climate change, to learn more about it, to engage in the issue, to have important conversations about this very, very important issue. And I'll tell you one thing I've gotten out of this, and I'm a lawyer, I need to know more. I need to understand this issue better. And we need to have more conversations on this issue on this program. So you can count on that. But for today's episode, I hope you'll enjoy a conversation with Steve Harvey and Yolanda Pagano, two lawyers who are calling on all the rest of us, lawyers and non-lawyers, to get involved and engaged on the important issue of climate change. Stay tuned. My guests today are Steve Harvey and Yolanda Pagano, two attorneys who were instrumental in starting the organization A Call to the Bar, a group designed to get lawyers across the country involved in the climate change issue. So first of all, Steve and Yolanda, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Well, this is a hugely important issue, obviously, and fascinating to me that you are both working in this area, and we're going to hear about that, and that you're calling lawyers across the country to get involved in this issue. I have to say, as a proud parent, my middle daughter is working this summer for a group called Sunrise Foundation and is going door to door on behalf of state representative candidates in Pennsylvania, emphasizing candidates who are pro-environment, who are not who are not receiving campaign donations from fossil fuel companies, for example. So I see that young people, and they need to be involved in this issue. They're the future. But tell us a little bit about each of you, yourselves, and this group, A Call to the Bar, and how this got started and what you're doing.
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Steve. So I'm a general litigator here in Philadelphia. I was a partner at a large law firm, and I've had my own firm for 5 years now. And we do commercial litigation and related things. And people ask me, is this your business? No, this is not my business. My business, I'm not involved in any way in practicing law specifically on climate change. Having said that, I've submitted a couple of amicus briefs in courts of appeals, but this isn't my business. But I am very concerned as a citizen because I've been following it for years, starting in law school. I remember when James Hansen gave the testimony in 1988 before the United States Congress, saying that at that point climate change was already a very well recognized and established science, and that it was real and that it was going to be a problem. And that was in 1988, and I remember just being very concerned about it. And then I did some science litigation throughout my career, including the Kitzmiller versus Dover Area School District case, which really reunited my interest and passion in science.
That was just say a sentence about what that is, because that's an important
Kitzmiller
case.
Was a 2005 case in central Pennsylvania that involved the teaching of something called intelligent design in public school science classes, an alternative to the scientific theory of evolution. I was a co-lead counsel for a group of parents with the ACLU and Americans United for Separation of Church and State, and we won that case. And the court held that intelligent design is not science, it's religion, and that the school district violated the First Amendment by promoting it in a public school science class.
Right.
So I got a pretty good grounding.
It's the modern day Scopes trial, really, in our era.
Correct. And a lot of people were on board with us in that case and what we were trying to achieve, which was just nothing more than keeping religion out of science class and promoting good science education. But the issues that are presented by climate change are in many times more important, arguably, and it really involved the same thing. They involved getting education out there, letting people know what the reality is about the science of this alarming problem. And so after I started my own firm, I just began to feel free to do some things that really touched me and moved me, and this was one of them. And then I was in touch at that time with my old friend, Yolanda Pagano, and my law school classmate, and she had the same interest. And so that was in 2013, I think. And since then, we've been working together, and we've done a number of things with our organization to try, and our goal for the organization is to bring awareness in the legal community and to lawyers of the gravity of this problem, the existence of solutions, and the ethical and need and moral need for lawyers to become involved in promoting and implementing those solutions for the good of ourselves and our children and the economy and everything.
Well, and I know, and I'm going to come to you, Yolanda, in just a second, but Steve, you wrote an article in 2015 about this issue and why you and Yolanda and others are calling on lawyers particularly to become involved in this issue, to become informed and to become active. And at one point in the article, you say, people ask why lawyers, because the solution to climate change must be expressed in law. And I want to hold that thought for a moment and come back to it because, you know, we've heard a lot about political activism, whether it's, you know, marches on Washington or, you know, as my daughter's involved in deciding which candidates we should support. We certainly have heard a lot about science and in some very small sectors of the world in beliefs about the science. But the idea that this is a problem that has to be addressed through law is really why I thought we should be talking about it on this program especially. So I want to come back to that idea in a moment. But first, Yolanda, tell us about yourself and your background.
Okay, as Steve mentioned, you know, being with Steve in law school, I though then went on a different path than Steve did, and actually have never practiced law, but went and leveraged my financial background. I'm an accounting undergrad. So I was in a public accounting firm for several years, then joined the energy industry, still in a financial position initially with Pico Energy here in Philadelphia, that now Pico is part of Exelon and was when I worked there as well. And over time, my position evolved from being in the finance organization to being involved more in governmental affairs and regulatory affairs. And then that ultimately concluded with me being involved in the environmental department, leading the company's climate change program.
And I'm interrupting only to emphasize and underline what you just said, because you were working for certainly one of the largest energy companies in our country in charge of their environmental and sustainability efforts.
Yes, exactly. So
Okay.
it was my title and the position I did predominantly was focused on climate change, but we also had the broader responsibility for sustainability as well, and that's where my career has taken me since then. But I'll just add a piece on what that climate change program looked like at Exelon. So it was both an effort to change the way we were operating to the degree that we could. Now, energy industry has a lot of long-lived assets, so we couldn't change over our fleet of facilities very quickly. So some of what we did was look to the potential to buy offsets, the carbon offset market, this ability to pay money to someone else for their reductions that they've achieved and have that offset your emissions, is a very viable methodology, akin to the cap and trade methodology that we'll probably talk about later in the program. Yes. It's very common methodology for environmental, to address environmental problems. It's been used for other air emissions as well and is used globally on the carbon front. So we did that both with offsets, the potential to use offsets. We actually wound up not doing that. We did all of our efforts internally, reducing our own usage, making our plants more efficient. So we were getting more energy out per energy input, more electricity out per energy input. And we participated in a voluntary program that existed at that time, doesn't currently, with the EPA called the Climate Leaders Program. And we exceeded an 8% goal and achieved, I think, was 23% reduction in the time frame that we had set that goal.
That's great.
And we were also active on the public policy front. We recognized as a company that public policy was needed. Again, the answer is in the law. And in order to do that, though, we couldn't just advocate for something without walking the talk. And so that was a very big part of having both aspects of the program, advocacy and action. I left Exelon. I was in consulting for several years, working with companies on their sustainability programs. And a big driver to most companies' sustainability programs is climate change in many instances. But if you look at the word sustainability, it's really a three-part, for people who may not know that term. It's really a three-part calculus, addressing environmental issues, social issues, and economic issues. So it still has to make sense for your business, what you're trying to do, but you're also making sure that you're taking into account the impact on citizens and the world that we live in. And now I'm with a private company, Keystone Foods, and I'm leading their global sustainability program. But the passion and the drive, recognizing that climate change is a big issue and it touches so many aspects of operations, you know, is at the heart of the matters today that I'm working on, but also involved with the organization, A Call to the Bar.
So how did this then come about? And I want to ask you, Steve, because these were your words in your article. Why must the solution to climate change be expressed in law, and how did that idea lead you with Yolanda to issue this call to the bar to get lawyers involved in this important issue?
Well, I'm going to say that, first of all, that statement I made in the article, upon reflection, is an incomplete statement. There are other reasons, and this has been a dialogue that we've had with lawyers in this community and throughout the country about why lawyers should be involved. So I think there's more to it than that, but that's certainly at the heart of it. I say this, I don't want to sound too cavalier, but voluntary action is really not the way to get anything done in a huge interconnected systemic world that we have. It's great that we all recycle. It's great that many of us do the right thing individually, but the forces that are at work here are so large that we're not going to get the traction that we need to protect ourselves in society unless we get some real buy-in, and that has to be expressed in law. I'm referring to international, national, regional, local laws that address this ongoing problem, hopefully in some coordinated way. Both of, and in the climate change world, we talk about two things. We talk about mitigation, which means bringing down the emissions, which are the number one central problem, and then reacting to the effects that that's already having and that's going to continue to have. So that's a lot that's happening there. And it's going to need large laws, like maybe something to drive down those carbon emissions, but all kinds of other laws designed to make cities safer and help us to live as a society. And with the way that hopefully to a great degree we want to be happy and we want to be prosperous, that enables us to continue that. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say, I just add this sort of refinement, right? The voluntary actions are important. And because in many instances they are at least preparing people. People are demonstrating that they're able to do those voluntary actions today in a way that, again, balances that economic outcome. So they're not making a choice between, do I get to do this and then I have this damaging impact to myself, whether it's financial or even societal. You know, I don't get to enjoy life the way I used to driving my car or whatever it is. They're able to balance that. And so they demonstrate that capability. They also demonstrate potential methods by which we could potentially achieve. The carbon offset markets are in large measure a voluntary market today. People are still interested in doing them. So they're useful and they are driving results. But to drive the major result and as quickly as we need it to happen, that's where the belief is that ultimately there has to be legislation or regulation that would address this.
Right, and you mentioned two key words that I was going to just get right to: legislation, laws, and regulation. And also, Steve, you alluded to this as well, treaties and international agreements that might exist among countries. We think about politicians today. Well, I just used the word. We think of them as politicians, just interested in getting elected or staying elected. But the other name that really should apply is lawmaker, whether at the state, local level or in Congress in Washington. These are people being elected to be lawmakers. And, I was also interested in another point in this article, and we'll put a link up to this so people can see it, that in 1987, which was right around the time of Hanson's remarks about climate change that you talked about earlier, Congress passed the Global Climate Protection Act, which was a law to say to the EPA, hey, come back and help us formulate a national policy on climate change. That was in 1987, and nothing has happened since then. Congress has really done nothing on this issue since then. So we talk, whether you're canvassing streets in, outside Harrisburg regarding state legislatures, or, making this an issue that is a voting issue, whatever it is, that really is one of the most fundamental things that people need to do, whether you have a law degree or not, right?
Absolutely. The Declaration of Independence says that we all have an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it also says in that same clause, and that government exists to secure these rights. Yeah. That is the purpose of the government, to secure our rights to life, liberty, and happiness. And if we have a world where we have rising seawaters and our food supplies are disrupted, and we have all kinds of other problems that are caused by something that we can't control, it would seem that it would be basic to our notions of law and government that we, the citizens, would demand it. And for a lot of reasons, that hasn't happened to date, and we need to make that happen.
Well, yeah, go ahead, Yolanda.
No, I was going to say, Aaron, you started your comments just now with the word politician, and I think that's part of the problem, right? We have such a partisan environment today that's causing people to take positions, not necessarily because they're thinking of what the right outcome is to secure the rights that Steve talked about, but because they are wedded to their statement, whatever their platform is. Having said that, we as an organization are not political. We believe this is a universal issue, and not just an American issue or local issue. It is universal, and it's necessary to have parties, again, not just parties come together, nations come together, people come together to really address the issue. So the education is critical. People recognize, and especially on this issue, we sit here in Philadelphia. Okay, sea level is going to rise. Well, the shore that we all go to sometimes, we're here from Philadelphia, right? That's an hour and a half away. That's really not my issue, maybe. But it is. The Earth is our home. It's the only home we have. And so if we're not protecting what we have today, we're wasting our ultimate resource, the place we live in, and making it untenable.
It is amazing that we as a country still seem not to be taking this issue seriously. As you mentioned that about the rising tides, and we're in Philadelphia. I mean, it's almost a joke if you're in Philadelphia. The next line that should come after the story you tell is, well, I guess I'll have beachfront property at that point. It's a joke.
Right.
And we don't take that seriously. I mean, Florida will be underwater, Manhattan will be underwater. Is that what it will take till this issue is taken seriously? But there have been other moments in our history when there have been issues of long-standing, deeply rooted, even deeply entrenched, seriousness that it just took a long time till it did become an issue treated seriously. And I want one of you, whoever wants to tell this story, because it's really integral to how you both got on this issue and calling lawyers in particular to get involved. And it takes us back to 1963.
Yeah, this is a great story, and we do call upon this for inspiration because it involved some Philadelphia lawyers, and the story is of the great Philadelphia lawyer Jerry Siegel, who at the time
Bernie Siegel.
Bernie Siegel. Yeah, I'm sorry, Bernie Siegel.
Yeah.
Sorry, apologize. And he was a prominent lawyer here in Philadelphia. I can't recall whether at that point he had been the president of the American Bar Association, but he was a very prominent guy, and he witnessed the events in the summer of 1963 down in Alabama, and his wife said to him, one day before he went to work, you're a big shot lawyer. Why can't you and your big shot lawyer friends do something about this appalling problem?
Right.
And so he went to the office that day, and I believe the immediate events was right around the time of Governor Wallace's defying of the order of integration. And he went to his office that day with another future president of the ABA, Jerry Shestak, and they started making calls around the country. And they organized a bunch of people a number of prominent lawyers, to sign on two letters which they paid to have published in the Alabama newspapers the following Monday, saying the people of this country are watching, the lawyers of this country are watching, and you should obey the law. And then following that, President Kennedy issued his famous call to the bar for the leaders of the organized bar and the legal community to come to Washington, D.C. to be lobbied by him and Bobby Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, a powerful lobbying combo if there ever was one. And the legal industry got squarely behind the need to address this really, really burning, pressing issue of racial integration and throughout this country, and particularly in the South, of course. And so we drew inspiration on that, and we stole the name, A Call to the Bar, and we have a colon, A Call to the Bar, Lawyers for Common Sense on Climate Change, as we go by, just so that people understand. It's a little long, but just really understand what we're promoting.
And Yolanda, the call that you're issuing for lawyers, why is as Steve pointed out, this isn't necessarily because you practice in this area, but there's something that lawyers understand from the training that we all have to get when we go through law school about the law and as I like to say on this program all the time, why the law matters in this issue. So, can you speak to that in a general way? Is climate change for lawyers and for really all of us, is it an economic issue? Is it a societal issue? Is it a moral issue? How do you care if you're going to try to get somebody as impassioned as you are on this issue? How do you do that? What do you appeal to in that person?
So the answer is yes, right? Is it a moral issue? Is it a legal issue? Is it a financial issue? Is it an ethical issue? It's all of those things, right? And that's why one of the reasons that we said this is not just an environmental issue. So this idea that a lot of people have that climate change is an environmental issue, environmental lawyers will handle it, is not true. This touches so many disciplines. Even when I took the position, for the climate change position that I did at PICO, I had to step back for a second before I accepted that position and think about, am I really the best person to do this? Or do I have the right qualifications? Let me say it that way. No one's ever the best person to do that. No, maybe somebody is, but I don't always necessarily think I am, right? But I think that I had to do the calculus, right? And I said, okay, well, this is something where we have to count emissions. I have a financial background, I can do that. I have to probably buy offsets. We did really think that we were going to have to buy offsets in that program. And that's another financial aspect. And I'm a lawyer. It's a contract, essentially. I have to make sure that what we're buying is really a true reduction. And so I have that legal background to do that. The science, I don't know as well, but there's a lot of engineers and scientists in my company, and they can help me with that. But I, even in taking that position, realized that there were those three disciplines already in front of me, right? Recognizing financial, legal, and science and engineering. But even then, health issues. Lots of medical studies. I mean, this is now, as I got more informed on the issue, lots of medical studies point to the fact that, heat indexes rising are causing other health problems for people, much broader social issue. Our own government, the Department of Defense, has done studies. Not only, number one, are all of the defense assets, think of our Naval Department, lots of our defense assets sit at sea level. Sea level changes, that does a lot to the infrastructure, just the physical infrastructure of our protection within the country. But in addition, the disruption that sea level rise will cause, whether it's, as Steve pointed out earlier, food disruption supplies, energy disruption, communication systems, all of those things can also cause concerns to our national security. Not just physical security, but national security and international incidents that we might get drawn into. So all of these things that just point to the interrelated nature of this, which says to me, and when we were discussing the issue, this is not just, again, you can't just point to one sector. And we see it even today. The city water department changed the way the stormwater allocations were being made. That's something that are currently contract lawyers in the city, other lawyers who are assisting their clients with, how do we build this building? How do we meet building business energy benchmarks that are being set in the city? How do we deal with the fact that we're now going to have a water surcharge because of our impervious surface, which we were not incurring before? All of these issues, again, health responses, say that lawyers on every front need to be involved in the issue. Today, when we don't yet have the legislation that's really needed, there's implications to your practice today and to your rights of your clients that you should be thinking about and being able to consult with your clients on so they're adequately informed. And then obviously preparing them for the future as well.
What I'm still thinking about at this point in our conversation, we're going to get to some specific issues, carbon, solar, some other things. The issue of racial injustice and the civil rights movement wasn't something that was born in 1963 when these two Philadelphia lawyers said we want to do something. And similarly, the issue of climate change isn't something that just erupted, in recent times. There was some point where these two Philadelphia lawyers were presented with the moral imperative to do something about the issue, or Bernie Siegel's wife gave, the moral imperative, to her husband. So it's striking that it seems we're still in a moment in these moments before we've gotten to that point where it's so clear that everybody has to be involved in doing something, that it is truly, as you said, a universal issue. It's a non-partisan issue. It's not about politics. Yet it seems that it still is. Since in the last 2 years, and just looking through some recent articles in the news and just generally keeping up with the news, we are turning away from the issue of focusing on climate change, if anything, as if we're deciding to put our heads firmly into the ground on this issue. And we're going back to the days of promoting fossil fuels, in this administration. So, we'll talk about some specifics, but still, floating above the issue, what is going on today, do you think?
Well, hopefully the current environment that seems to be opposed to doing anything, but clearly is opposed to doing anything about climate change, which is reflected in the current administration strongly. We are not partisan, but we do take a note of those politicians and those people who are promoting things that make sense for the environment and those that are not promoting things that make sense. And the current administration is completely opposed to doing anything progressive or corrective or mitigating on climate change, and in fact, as you correct, they want to promote fossil fuels. That's, we hope, a very short-term trend. Longer term, we have the support. So we're lawyers. We're not scientists. We're not theologians, and we're really good about not misrepresenting ourselves. So we translate for others. That's one of the things we do as lawyers. We journalists do a similar kind of function, but we take complicated information after we've talked, we verified it, and then we present it. And what we know is that there has been a worldwide movement in religion, among religious leaders, recognizing that this is a problem. The Pope is the most notable because he's the head of the largest religious organization in the world, but he's certainly not alone. There are many leaders of all faiths who, at very high levels, who have spoken out very clearly on this issue. The Pope is one of many, many voices that would, and this would encompass all the mainstream Protestant mainstream Protestant groups in this country, all mainstream Jewish groups, and other world faiths, Islam and Buddhism and others. There's really a clear, and that's based on the science. They are speaking theologically based on the science, or speaking to us about what our obligation is as people. So we have that going for us, and that is a very, very big, substantial thing. And we hope that as time goes on, more and more people, this short-term trend will be offset by a longer-term trend of people wanting to take action. The question is going to be, of course, whether that's soon enough. This problem has some real urgency. So that's one thing we have going for us. The other thing we have going for us is that there are people of tremendous influence on both sides of the political aisle on this one who are very supportive. There is a group of conservative economists that includes George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, and other positions, James Baker, Gregory Mankiw, the head of the economics department at Harvard, and a list of other people anybody would recognize as conservatives, leading economists, and they all agree that it is a real problem, and that the major solution that we need to implement is some kind of a carbon fee, sometimes called a carbon tax. We can talk about that more as we go on. But the point I'm making here is that's coming from economists and people who identify as conservatives.
Well, let me stay on that point, because and maybe Yolanda, you can speak to this, because you come from an energy company background, and Exelon is not just in electricity, they're in nuclear. I mean, they're the old guard in terms of, providing energy in this country. And I was in Italy with my wife recently this summer, and just driving around the country, beautiful Tuscan countryside, and you can't believe how many solar panel fields you see. It's everywhere. Houses with solar panels all over their roofs. And we're like what's beyond a third world? We're like a fourth world country when it comes to this, it seems. And, I'm trying to figure out why this isn't more universally recognized, why this does seem to be partisan, the issue of climate change, there's nothing inherently Democrat or Republican or liberal or conservative about that, but And there seem to be inherent contradictions even in some of the policies. I'm just using this as an example. I saw that among the industries that President Trump has decided to include in his tariff policy is the solar panel industry, and has put a 5-year 30% tariff on the importing of solar panels. And this is said to have all kinds of rebound effect in this industry, causing a halt to $2.5 billion in solar installation projects in our country. And I don't think it can be about jobs, because I think there are far more people working in the solar industry at this point in our country than work in coal. But the president is speaking to the coal miners like we should be ramping up coal production in our country instead. So from an economic standpoint, from a political standpoint, it doesn't make any sense. So I still am asking and scratching my head, why? What is the issue? It's not, I mean, you were involved in the issue of, the modern version of creationism. That's religion. That's religiously motivated. You could say that there are people who are very passionate about abortion, that issue today, because they come from a religious perspective on that issue. And it makes sense whether you agree or not. But on this issue, I mean, what everyone says is 97% of scientists agree, and there's 3% who are not agreeing. But what is it they're not agreeing with? Why isn't this something, do you think? Why have we not reached that moment?
So I'll say two things, maybe three. So one is, fundamentally, there's going to be winners and losers on this issue, right? If all of my investments are in fossil assets and suddenly they fall out of favor, I'm going to be a loser on some level in this calculus. And so we have to take that into account, to be quite honest, in making this transition. And it's a transition that needs to be made, but we have to bring that along. We also have to recognize that you can't shutter all those things immediately.
When you say winners and losers, you mean money losers?
Correct, absolutely.
Business losers, jobs losers.
Personal losers, right? Those people with the houses at the shore who, if Philadelphia becomes shorefront property, that's a lot of real estate that's going to also be impacted by this, right? So, I mean, there's winners and losers on many levels.
Right.
So whenever that's the case, somebody's got to make the playing field a little bit fairer. So that's why when you were in Europe and you saw more solar panels, more wind turbines potentially, if you went through Germany, you'd see a lot of wind turbines. Yep. There are provisions in place to incentivize those things. Same thing here. If you go to New Jersey, you'll see many more houses with solar panels on them. They have a very strong solar incentive program in New Jersey. We have one here in Pennsylvania too, not as strong, very strong in New Jersey. So you see those differences in the outcomes because of a financial incentive. That's one aspect of it. The other thing I think that's important is that to look at the that intersection, that balance of how do we. There's not a significant cliff event that's going to happen with this issue, and so. It always seems far off and remote to people. One of the things that here in Philadelphia, the sustainability office is doing in Philadelphia in conjunction with our parks department is realizing they've looked at what the projections are for climate in this area. And they recognize that our climate by the end of this century may be more akin to what we currently think of as the climate in North Carolina. Well, if that's the case and you have the largest municipal park system, right, with thousands of trees, well, you're going to be dealing with a whole different set of species in 100, well, less than 100 years, 80 years or so, than you're dealing with today. How do you prepare for that? They're already planting in the park system, that adaptation that Steve was talking about, right? Mitigation is one aspect. Let's reduce what we're doing. But adapting, how do we adapt to the new normal? They're starting to think about that. It's very hard for the individual person to think, 80 years from now, I'm not going to be here. My children likely may not even be here. To think of those implications. So that's where there's a big disconnect, I think, not a big, but it's much more tangential, or it's just not in people's lives in a way that is very impactful on a daily basis. So you have to turn to the science and recognize that the scientists are right. The discrepancies between the 97% of scientists and the 3% of scientists are all about the projection models. right? It's did this calculation, does this model actually project what's going to happen? Well, as any of us know, no model is going to project anything perfectly, but it gives you a sense of the direction, a sense of the impacts, a sense of where things are headed. If you're going to nitpick every decision that was made in setting this parameter or that parameter, or looking at this set of data versus that set of data, yes, of course we're going to disagree. I like blue shirts, you like pink shirts. Well, sure, that's the way it is. We're not going to have a definitive mark, but that's where people are taking advantage of those little decisions to make it appear as if there's not scientific consensus on this issue, but there is.
There's also, Aaron, been a very well orchestrated and funded and long-term campaign. Much of the fossil fuel industry is behind this, and there's no question about this. Is extremely well documented to sow misinformation and doubt about climate change and about the effects of it. It used to be, the question was whether it was even real, whether human activity, specifically CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions, were causing the climate change. There's no question about that. You can't realistically argue that point. So then the new game was, well, how bad is it, and how soon? We don't want to overreact. We don't want to do. And the reality is that we're increasingly learning that it is a very, very serious problem. We're seeing the consequences of it now, and there's really good data. Again, not me. I'm not an expert, but my understanding is there's really good science and social science research about climate change and what the effect that is having in Syria, and the effect that is having as part of that war in Syria, and part of the refugee crisis is being caused because it's getting hotter and hotter in places people want to move north where it's more hospitable. So there is that campaign of misinformation. Yolanda mentioned adaptation and mitigation. And a few years ago, I would have laughed if you had told me, if you suggested adaptation, I would not have a serious conversation with you. You think we're going to adapt our way out of this serious problem? And I think there's still, there's something to that. Having said that, the reality is that adaptation has taken off, and it takes off at the homeowner level, because you're seeing more rain, you think, well, do I need new gutters? What am I going to do with my roof? I mean, it's a very personal thing. We're seeing municipalities are being, as Yolanda explained, all across this country, Republican districts, Democratic districts, they're having to confront the change in the weather and what they're going to do about it. And so now I think we should work on adaptation, because it's obvious we need to all keep our houses up and keep our cities up.
Right.
But at the same time, it's making people aware. So it's actually bringing them around on mitigation, on the need to address the big problem, on unrelenting greenhouse gas emissions. That's the big problem that we have to address. And if adaptation helps get us there, while we all get new gutters, and I think that's good.
Well, and the third leg of something we haven't mentioned is resiliency, right? That's another aspect to this. So Manhattan, those storms a few years ago, which caused all that flooding into the subway system, right?
Hurricane Sandy.
Exactly. Thank you. They're now recognizing that, okay, we actually have to fortify the where the water meets our land, right? And so how are they doing that? They are building structures that are multi-purpose. So they're building these different types of parks. They've had an engagement where they're doing the planning for this. I'm not sure how much of this is yet under construction. But one of the plans, for instance, is to build tennis courts and soccer fields that are built with concrete seating that rises up and provides a barrier. So when there's nothing happening and conditions are normal, you have social aspects to the money that you spent, right? You've created new parks, et cetera, but you've also built a system that reinforces your ability to keep water from infiltrating the city. Again, these become the tangible elements that Steve, I think, is talking about, the tangible things that make people realize, oh, this is realer than we think. If we're spending this kind of money and we're doing these sorts of things, this is much more an issue that we're facing today than this 80-year or 100-year issue or some, unconceivable amount of time that I don't have to think about it.
Well, and it's fascinating thinking about adaptation and mitigation and some of these changes that can happen at the level of a homeowner, or could happen at the level of the biggest city in our country, Manhattan, New York City. What is part of what you're asking of lawyers is to become more aware and also to act. This is a call to action, and emphasizing that the law matters in this area, and there are all different levels of law that apply. what if somebody, here I am that somebody, I'm going to ask, I'm a lawyer, a call to act how? What do you think is should we be talking about carbon? I would like to understand that better if so. I mean, is that what we should be talking about? Is it a focus on elected representatives? Is it studying more about international relations and how that plays into this? Is it litigation?
Well, we strongly encourage all lawyers to become aware of the problem and aware of the solutions and start working to help implement and make those solutions real. That can happen in many, many different ways. That could be, the first thing that everyone should do is educate themselves on the issue. There's a lot that's written out there. There are many credible sources that you can go to. I don't know if the NASA website is still as good as it was. I think there's really still some good information on the NASA website, but there's a lot of university and there's unimpeachable information that you can use, and it's really a fascinating issue too. It's really interesting. So educating yourself, educating others, and then if you have the will and the wherewithal, get involved. Get involved in your legal community. Make it an issue for your local bar association, and then that leads to lots of things. I mean, we've been involved in lobbying Congress. We've met with we always like to meet with Republicans, frankly, because we want to talk to the people who we think we're going to need to bring around a little bit. And we had some wonderfully receptive some meetings in our time.
And with the Congressional Climate Caucus as well.
Exactly.
Well, that's a bipartisan effort to a member from each side.
And we have worked with other bar associations. We've been building relationships with bar associations around the country. So we have a really strong relationship with the New York City Bar Association, with the Philadelphia Bar Association, with the Oregon State Bar. And those are our biggest partners. But we also have lawyers working with us in Florida and around the country. So if you want to work with us, www.calltothebar, or find me there. You can drop me information. We see ourselves as, it may be a bad word, I don't know, but fire starters. We can't coordinate. We can't coordinate a national movement. We don't have the funding to do that. But what we can do is light fires. And fires we're already going in New York and Oregon and elsewhere. And so we're looking to build that. We're dying.
Right, and we've been working with the International Bar Association. So we are, although most of our efforts have been focused on the U.S., we have had international speakers at 2 conferences. We've called them, billed them as national conferences, but we've had international speakers and international participants in those conferences. So we are trying to also link to the international community on the issue as well.
And one thing we constantly promote is environmental justice, and if we're running out of time, this brings it full circle. Yeah. Because as lawyers, we should be concerned about justice. That's our charge. And this is a justice issue, and it's going to be justice for all of us ultimately, but unfortunately, it's going to hit the poor and the vulnerable first, and we see that already. We know that's happening. And so at our conferences, we've brought wonderful speakers on environmental justice, and that really brings together the law and the morality and the ethics of the situation. And we just want other lawyers to be part of it and listen.
I think that does bring around it. Let me kind of round out our discussion, and I think we could go another hour if we didn't have our time limitations today, because we didn't get to some of the specifics, and I still want to understand cap and trade and carbon tax better than I do, but we can do that another day. This is an election year. 2018 midterm elections in November are going to be significant for a whole bunch of reasons. If you were talking to, and I don't think this is an unfair question, I don't think this is a Democrat or Republican question, because I'm not going to ask it in that way, but if you were to be asked, what are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you would hope people to focus on when it comes to climate change and how they decide who can be a responsible lawmaker in the coming years, how would you outline that?
So I think that, you want to hear from your whoever the candidates are, right? What are the candidates' positions with respect to the issue of climate change? What are they thinking some of the solutions are? Is there incentive programs that can be put in place, like we were talking about, for renewable resources? Asking them these questions, it's probably not a topic that's, especially at the local level, smaller elections or people who they're used to talking of much more, issues that are closer to the heart. But you've got to ask the questions of your candidate. If this is an issue that you think is important, and we think it is, we hope that your listeners will as well, this is an issue you have to get in their faces about and find out what their positions are, what they're doing about it, what their intentions are. One of the things that we as an organization were also asked to do was help support local not local candidates, but local politicians in thinking about, we have a responsibility to the community that we're in charge of. What is it that we need to know to be able to do that? Some people aren't versed in that. So if your candidate isn't, please find a way to help get them versed in it. Approach us, approach others, the environmental organizations within the city who could help provide more information, again, web searches, but hear the candidates' positions on the issue. It's critical that it get asked.
Well, you said it. I'm going to take you up on it. You said call us. So I'm going to, in the description of this episode, I'll include links to the website for A Call to the Bar and your emails and
Steve at calltothebar.org.
There you go.
Yolanda at calltothebar.org.
Fantastic. Okay, we will post that as well so people will be able to find you.
Can I give one more thing in there?
Yes, please.
Remaining?
Go ahead.
There's an organization called Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a nonpartisan group which is working for carbon fee and dividend. In the minds of many people who work on this issue, there is no single thing we could do that would be more powerful than the carbon fee and dividend proposed by Citizens Climate Lobby. It might get tweaked by the politicians, it would still be a good thing.
Oh, but you can't stop there, because now you have to give me 2 sentences on what it is. So
well, I would say go to citizensclimatelobby.org. That'll have a lot of information, but a carbon fee and dividend is a proposal where we would place a fee on carbon as it came into the economy, whether that's a barge of coal coming in, or whether it's coming out of the mine or the wellhead. And there would be a fee that would be placed, and the energy companies would have to pay that fee. They would then pass that on to their customers, which would mean all of our energy bills would go up.
Gas prices, heating,
gas prices would go up.
Food prices. I mean, this does have tangential impacts across the economy, but yes, absolutely.
Correct. It would have, and at the same time, it would disincentivize you from doing those things that cause you to use more. And at the same time, it would have an unbelievably powerful effect in the economy, because those who could deliver energy without emissions, that would become very, very valuable. So solar would be very valuable, wind would be very valuable. That idea that somebody's cooking up where we have a house that doesn't let out any cool air or let any warm air in, there's a lot that could be done technologically, and that would drive all that. At the same time, all the money would be collected and then rebated back to the citizens on a per capita basis, which would have a wonderful stimulus effect. It would have another effect, because if we place this on the American economy, it wouldn't be possible to do this unless you placed some kind of a fee on people bringing in goods from an economy where this wasn't the case. So it would automatically have the effect of forcing the rest of the world to implement similar laws in their countries if they expect to trade in the United States market. And since many of them are already on board with this anyway, this could be, if you're looking for a single solution that's going to help us get there, this is it.
Well, see, that's what I don't get again, and this does round out our conversation for today, because in Europe, it seems they are moving in that direction. You know, we just had the G7 conference before Trump went to meet with Putin. And 6 of the 7, that is all the members of the G7 except for the United States, came out with a very strong statement on climate change. And the Trump administration issued an addendum in support of the fossil fuel industry. It was the only one. So, if you have a president who appoints the head of Exxon as your Secretary of State, and you issue executive orders saying we're going to do everything we can to lift regulations on the fossil fuel industry, it seems like the complete opposite direction from what you're talking about. And if anything, we are incentivizing the further extraction of fossil fuels and the development of that industry to the detriment of these other segments of the economy. So we're not only not in that moment, we seem to be moving away from that moment, which is all the more reason why this conversation is as important as it is. And I hope people will check out A Call to the Bar and see what information is there. I hope we'll keep the conversation going. And thank you guys really so much for being on Good Law, Bad Law.
Thank you for having us.